New Orleans Saints, Brandon Aiyuk trade, the case for and the case against. Let's watch. Ross, take it away.
Francisco 49ers wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk wants out, and therefore the New Orleans Saints should want in. We got all that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
Little intro music, little graphic. Boom.
You are Locked On Saints.
Locked On
your
Saints.
Daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Okay.
Oh, what is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media.
Okay, hold on a second. Expert. I guess Ross is an expert. For a second, I thought he was saying he's the expert. Because I mean, you know,
covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to take a look at the things that can get in the way of offensive success for Clint Kubiak's next system or new system here in New Orleans, and how the single customer, that's right, there's something for everyone. Go at least give John Lynch a phone call. Hey, what would it take? I mean, you have to give the farm for him. Off season, I want to go into the case for and against the New Orleans Saints pursuing Brandon Aiyuk. My personal opinion is that they should at least make the phone call.
I agree with that. That part I agree with. I think you at least make the phone call. I think you say, you know, what's it going to take? If the Niners come back and say a third, do it. Trade it. Do it. You know, why not? Now, Aiyuk's issue is that he wants to be paid as if he is one of the best receivers in the game. Not arguing that he's not, but the Saints really aren't in the market of going and trading for a guy who then you will have to sign as a true number one type deal. True number one type money. Okay? So that part is a little weird. Now, if we can trade for him, trade a third, trade a fourth. I don't know what it would cost. Probably a lot more than that. Trade a third, have him for 1 year, a rental. That's it. I don't hate that either. But it is complicated when it comes to our cap.
Doesn't mean you have to give the farm for him. Doesn't mean you have to really get into competing with teams like the Steelers and the Washington Commanders and others who are very likely to be also a part of this conversation, or are very likely to be a part of this conversation. But I do think you owe it to yourself, your organization, your fan base, your roster, your coaches to at least give this one a shot.
Yeah,
see
I agree.
What happens with it, right? Go at least give John Lynch a phone call. Hey, what would it take? What's the asking price? Kind of figure all this stuff out. There were some early reports that, of course, a first-round pick was the asking price. That's what every team wants for almost any.
I'd say no. If it was a first-rounder, if it's a first-rounder for Aiyuk, I'd say no.
Player these days,
unless it's like 2028, then whatever.
That's very rarely what they ever get. A lot of people assume that the typical quote-unquote disgruntled player pay price, which is a second round and a fifth round pick, we've seen it for several players now across the NFL. I believe that was even what Brian Burns ended up getting traded for, despite the fact that Carolina had an offer on the table a year before from the Los Angeles Rams of 2 first-round picks. But let's not get focused on the Panthers' failures here. Let's look at a potential success for the New Orleans Saints. So you imagine that a second and a fifth round pick could potentially be enough. Is that?
That's right there. A second and a fifth is right there. A third and a fifth, sure. A second and a fifth, I had to really have a conversation about the cap.
Good enough for a 1-year rental. Is that good enough for a guy that
I don't think a second and a fifth is worth a 1-year rental. If you are paying a second and a fifth, I think you believe that you could have a chance to sign him long term.
I bring into the building for a year, then maybe get an extension done with. We'll see. I think that there is a misconception that Brandon Aiyuk wanted his extension from the San Francisco 49ers, didn't get it, and therefore where he ends up, that he would require getting an extension and a long-term deal done wherever he ends up as well. That's not always the case. We'll learn if that's a part.
I think he definitely expects to be paid. And I think he definitely expects to be paid well. I think Brandon Aiyuk, and this happens all the time, where a player is in a system with a multitude of great players. George Kittle, Brandon Aiyuk, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey. And the player thinks they are the engine. The player thinks they are driving that offense. The team then thinks, no, my man, we have a system here. Like, we have a system. We have a good thing working. We can't pay one part of the system a ton of money because then the system falls. That happens all the time. All the time. It happens. It would be like in the Patriots days where Wes Welker would say, wait a minute, I want to be paid like the number one wide receiver. And the Patriots would say, well, my man, you aren't a number one wide receiver. You are our number one wide receiver, but we are a specific system. Right? Same with Julian Edelman. Same with Brandon Stokely back in the Peyton Manning days. Same with any of the receivers with Breeze. Right? If Marcus Colston said, I want to be paid like a number one wide receiver in the NFL, it's like, you are good, you are putting up numbers, but you are not a number one wide receiver in the NFL. You know, it's kind of it's a tough conversation to have, but it happens all the time.
Part of Brandon Ayuk's part of the equation, but that still wouldn't stop teams probably from pursuing him as a one-year rental anyway, and that's probably what this would be if you're the New Orleans Saints. You trade for him, bring him in, give up a second and a fifth round pick, you get a year with him, give him the opportunity then to go hit free agency in 2025, same time as T. Higgins is now set to hit free agency. Let him go out there, sign a big contract. You get a third round competitive.
But what sense does that make? What sense does that make to trade the second and the fifth for a one-year rental? Your win total is 7.5. You won 9 games last year. We're going to be begging to win 8, 9, 10 wins this year. So you're giving up a second and a fifth for what? A one-year rental for a guy that you're hoping can boost you to 9 wins? Newsflash. Brandon Aiyuk isn't boosting you to 10 or 11 wins. He will make you better, but you're going to need a whole lot more to win those games. So I don't see the rental aspect of it.
Tory selection in the next year as a part of that equation, and then boom, yeah, there you go. You're done.
Boom.
You know what I mean? You got what you got out of him for a year.
Yeah.
Is that really the route that the Saints want to go?
No.
I don't know, but that's the case for doing it, is that you would bring him in for 2024 and try to maximize your ability to compete in 2024. Now, I have been gung-ho on the idea that Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed are set for star trajectories in 2024. I do think that bringing in a Brandon Aiyuk impacts that because it takes away targets from those guys.
No, it impacts it to the better, because if you bring in Brandon Aiyuk, it's just one more weapon for the defense to try and figure out. It's just one more weapon that the defense has to plan for. It doesn't take targets away. It does in a sense, but it doesn't negatively impact your team. Like Puka Nacua doesn't negatively impact Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp doesn't negatively impact Puka Nacua. If you took one of them off of the team, it wouldn't positively impact the other one. It would negatively impact the other one, because then the coverage and the double teaming and all that would be much more on that player. So getting Brandon Aiyuk would benefit Chris Olave. It would benefit Rashid Shaheed.
To some capacity, at least. And with the, like we said, we're expecting to see more 2 wide receiver sets, things like that. That could potentially cut into one of those guys' snaps, particularly probably Rashid Shaheed in that.
No doubt about it. It'd be Rashid Shaheed.
That equation. But outside of that, it also gives you a guy to draw the sort of attention of a defense and then be able to.
And I've said this before too, don't get caught in wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, running back 1, running back 2. If Clint Kubiak and I'm speaking highly of Clint Kubiak here, but part of Kyle Shanahan's offense is that he's going to get whoever he wants on the field. So if he wants Chris Olave, Brandon Aiyuk, and Rashid Shaheed on the field at the same time, but he's in a 2 wide receiver set, it won't be nothing to Kyle Shanahan to have Olave and Aiyuk as the receivers, and then have the 2 running backs be Alvin Kamara and Rashid Shaheed, have Shaheed motion out. That's how you do it. Okay? So this isn't 1999. Just because you're wide receiver 3, isn't in the slot doesn't mean he won't be featured. So, and I'm not saying that, they would always do that, but this offense does have some flexibility to get the best players on the field no matter what.
To elevate the talent that you have on the opposite side of Aiyuk, whether that's Olave or Shaheed in most of those situations. So for me, the thing that I look at is you kind of have to balance the for, which is, can he help you compete right now, versus the against, does he stifle, even if just for a year, the development of your future superstar potential, future star potential level players.
I think arguing that Brandon Aiyuk would stifle your star, don't look at me like that, Ross. I think arguing that Brandon Aiyuk would stifle the superstar development of Rashid Shaheed is absolutely insane. I think that is one of the craziest things I've ever heard in my entire life. Absolutely insane. In what universe does bringing on a great player stifle the development of your young players? Like, did bringing on Randy Moss stifle any of the development of the player, of the wide receiver room for the Patriots? Like, what the Dolphins signed Odell Beckham. Is that stifling the development? Calvin Ridley's on the Titans now. Is Calvin Ridley stifling the development of anyone in the Titans receiver room? In what universe would bringing on Brandon Aiyuk be considered a negative to the wide receiver room or a negative to Rashid Shaheed? That's crazy.
Which one's better? And I think for the long term, you're probably leaning towards the latter as more of your focus. But
you're also wagering, this is also an insane gambit, where you are wagering that the long-term impact of Rashid Shaheed or whoever will at some point reach a level better than or good enough or the same as Brandon Aiyuk, which is a serious gamble. You cannot guarantee that. I mean, I don't know about this one, Ross. This one's out there.
But for the short term, you're leaning towards more of the former, actually trying to make this move as the better option, which makes sense because one of them is very clearly short term, while the other one is very clearly long term. Now, you could potentially land Brandon Aiyuk and work out an extension, because an extension would allow you to knock down his cap hit in 2024, extend and push some money out into 2025, 2026, 2027, all those other things.
Yeah.
An extension probably would be part of what would be required in order for the team to be able to make the move in the first place. Well,
then what the hell are we talking about? If an extension is required for the team to make the move in the first place, why are we talking about a rental? This is insane. This is crazy.
That depends. Like, this team has shown that it is not right now seeing itself in position to give out those long-term deals.
Yeah, right.
Apropos this offseason, where everything was a bunch of short-term deals, one-year deals, things like that. So I think that there's your case against, right? Stifle some of the development of some of your younger players, while also
look, ladies and gentlemen, let me help you out here. That is not part of the conversation. Stifling your young player development is not part of this equation. The pro is that Brandon Aiyuk is awesome. The con is that you're going to have to pay him a lot of monies, and we don't have a lot of monies. End chapter. End of book. That is what the Saints are wagering. That is what the Saints are trying to figure out. They're not trying to figure out if it'll stifle the development of Bub Means. They're not trying to figure out if bringing on Brandon Aiyuk will stifle the development of Rashid Shaheed. That is absolutely bananas and pajamas insane. Not part of the thing. Not part of the conversation. On one side of the ring, you have a Pro Bowl, awesome, super cool, sweet, dope, awesome, cool, sweet wide receiver, and Brandon Aiyuk. On the other side, in the blue corner, you have a team with salary cap issues. Fight. That's it. There is no development stifling. There is no None of that. Okay. The Saints are starved for a great wide receiver. One of our weakest position group is wide receiver. There is not a con to actually bringing on Brandon Aiyuk if you can. If you feasibly can do it financially and whatever else, there is not a con. Do it. Now, I'm not going to say trade two firsts for him, but if the price is a second and a fifth, and you can sign Aiyuk to a long-term deal, do it. The development of Bub Means and Cedric Wilson and whoever else is not part of that equation.
Also opening up more opportunities for them, but overall probably stifling them because it's taking targets away, taking focus away from those players. And then, of course, having to deal with the money of it all.
This is another thing I always talk about. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, players do more than play the games. Practice, training camp, walkthroughs, watching tape, workouts, off-season, preseason, OTAs. Just because Brandon Aiyuk will take 6-7 catches a game away doesn't mean that the development is stifled. Does anyone here think that Jamal Williams hurt the development of Kendra Miller? Because Kendra Miller was under him on the depth chart? Or do you think Kendra Miller still got in his workouts, got in his training camp, off-season work, still did all that? It's insane.
The Saints could potentially give up that second and fifth round picks, those second and fifth round picks, and then end up bringing him in under the salary cap by, finally getting this extension done with Alvin Kamara to knock the salary cap space down and things like that. Like there's a lot of different ways they could potentially get him in under the hood, but then what do you do with him after that? What do you do with the money after that? Do you just let it sit as a whole right away? Or do you end up trying to extend and then potentially pushing more money down the road when you're trying to get out from under some of the cap mechanics that you've had to do post-COVID?
That's the real conversation.
Post the COVID seasons and all that. So that's where things can get a little bit kind of jumbly, a little bit jam-packed for you and everything like that. But if you're looking at some point to rotate this team into what has become the typical style of building an offense across the NFL, which is build the offense, maintain, find, sign, trade for, obtain, however it is you want to look at it, long-term talent on the offense around the quarterback, and then eventually just slot a rookie quarterback in or a quarterback on a rookie contract in, then this then could potentially be one of those 2-3 year down the line moves. But then you're having entirely different conversations because have you extended Chris Olave? Have you extended Rashid Shaheed? Who's your offensive coordinator? Who's your head coach in 2-3 years? All these other things. So it just seems like a little bit of uncertainty when it.
Now that part, if I'm Dennis Allen, I'm for sure signing Brandon Aiyuk because Dennis Allen's thinking, I don't care about the cap. I might get fired. So if you're Dennis Allen, all hands on deck. Okay. All hands on deck. Sign whoever. Sign this running back. Sign this wide receiver. Sign this tight end. Don't care. Because if you're Dennis Allen, what you're focused on is this year. What you're focused on is right now. You're not focused on 2027's cap. All right? So Dennis Allen should be the first one saying we should sign Brandon Aiyuk. Dennis Allen should be number one on the phone calling John Lynch. Because what's he got to lose? Nothing. What's he want to... He wants to not sign Brandon Aiyuk so that he can develop Bub Means. By the time he developed Bub Means, Dennis Allen's going to be the defensive coordinator of the Steelers. Right? So Dennis better roll out the red carpet.
Comes to that. So I think everything you're looking for the four when it comes to this, the case for trading for Aiyuk is about short-term competition. Everything, though, in terms of the kind of argument against a trade for Brandon Aiyuk comes down to, well, what about the long-term ability to be competitive for this team? I think that's the way that you're looking at it. Are you willing to put the long-term development on hold to see if you can compete right now? Or are you concerned that the roster, even with Brandon Aiyuk, isn't good enough to compete right now, and therefore the long-term goals are much more important? That's kind of, I think, what this is all going to come down to. Plus, of course, teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers, Washington Commanders, and others being very, very desperate in terms of trying to find a receiver for their young quarterbacks or new quarterbacks. Let's say it that way. All right, coming up next, let's take a look at midweek fundamentals. I want to take a look at what Clint Kubiak's system.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think I philosophically disagree with what Ross is saying. I think Ross has kind of missed the point on how this works. I would take a shot at it. I mean, like I said, if I could, I don't know the salary cap stuff, but I would have a conversation with our cap guy in the front office, and I would say, listen, you tell me how we can make this work. What's the pros? What's the cons as far as financials? Will we have to cut, one of our higher contracts? Will we have to trade this player? Will we have to do this? Or do we just manipulate the cap, push money into future seasons? If so, what's it going to cost us, pick-wise? And then you probably make the deal. There you go. All right. Let me catch up in chat. I think Aiyuk wants more than he's really worth. Also, it's awkward because then him and Olave would both be number one. See, I mean, like I said, I don't really believe in the whole, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2. The new style of the NFL is the Rams. It is the 49ers. Who is the one on the Rams? Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua? They would probably say, we don't care. There isn't a one. We're both just getting open. Who's the one last year for the Niners? Who cares, right? Sometimes it's Christian McCaffrey. Sometimes it's Brandon Aiyuk. Sometimes it's Deebo Samuel. Sometimes it's George Kittle. They're just trying to win games. Eagles, who's the one? A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith? They'll probably tell you, who cares? We're just trying to get open. Whoever they throw the ball to, works for me. My boy James finally caught alive. Kyrie's World. Welcome. With the players we have, is our offense going to look more like the Niners or the Dolphins? I believe we have the players to be a mixture of the two. Yeah, I think it'll be a mixture of the two. I think those two offenses, if you take the Dolphins, you take the Niners, put them together, I think that'll be very similar to what we are. I would say we are probably passing game-wise more like the Niners, and we're probably running game-wise more like the Dolphins. C-Mac equals AK, Aiyuk equals Olave, Tyreek Hill equals Shaheed. I don't know about that. Tyreek Hill had 1,700 yards last year. I don't think Shaheed's going to get there.